You calling every number in Sunnyvale?
Here, let's see what we have so far. Excuse me. Doesn't identify itself. Help games.
Games refers to models, simulations, and games that have tactical
That must be
and
them.
strategic application.
List games. Wow.
What?
We got something. We're in.
Shall we play a game?
Oh.
I think I missed him.
Yeah, weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Love to. How about global thermonuclear war?
Wouldn't you prefer a good game of chess?
Later, let's play global thermonuclear war.
Fine.
All right. Wow.
Which side do you want?
I'll be the Russians.
Please list primary targets.
Who should we nuke first?
Let's see. How about Las Vegas?
Las Vegas. Great. What next? Seattle!
Yeah! Kill him.
I have 7, correction, 8. That's 8 redbirds, 2 degrees past apogee.
Better get the old man down here.
What you got up here, Joe?
Sir, we have radar tracking. 8 inbound Soviet ICBMs. Already over the pole. Estimated impact, 11 minutes. Confirmed target area, western United States.
Why didn't we get a launch detection?
I'm not sure, sir. We're checking for DSP malfunction.
What is all that stuff?
I don't know. They're trajectory headings for multiple impact re-entry vehicles.
What's that mean?
I don't know, but it's great. I wonder if I should use my subs.
Yeah, sure. Give him the works.
David?
Excuse me.
David! How many times have I told you to fasten these lids on tight? Would you look at this mess?
I'll be down in a few minutes, all right, Dad?
Now. You'll come down now. I want this
Honey,
cleared up right away.
You come down here and do what your
Well, how
father
could you do
asked you
this?
to pronto, David.
Yes, sir. Mr. President,
Station 7, report power
I don't know
status.
exactly what it is, sir. I'll get back to you as soon as I know.
Reconfirm.
What's happening, Joe?
General Beam using covert A now report negative confirmation on all of inbound tracking.
Get on the sack. Tell them to hold steady.
Stop! It's a simulation! There's an attack simulation running! I'm sorry, sir. We don't know how it happened, but someone on the outside fed an attack simulation into the matrix simulation!
Conley, take us off full alert. Hold at DEFCON 4 till we find out exactly what in the hell's happening here.
I didn't tell you to cut the line. Did I tell you to cut the line? You cut the line! Sir, they shut down before we could complete our trace.
We did manage to locate the general area where the transmission originated.
Where?
Seattle, Washington.
Shut it down.
Somebody's playing a game with us.
John Lilly once put it this way: there are no limits at all to the human mind whatsoever, except those we impose on ourselves because of our beliefs. And those limits are also beliefs to be transcended. And that's a view that suggests that the possibilities of human transformation are virtually infinite. And we have no way of knowing the outer horizon of what it means to be human.
And really, to understand all this, everything, you have to go very, very deep into a study of history, consciousness, neurophysiology, everything. You have to be the supreme eclectic type of leaning, and you really have to be wanting to know who you are and what everything's about.
And the thing that you'll find when you go to sacred sites, if you're very humble about it, is that you are on a personal journey, and the sacred site will respond to you in a way that is appropriate only to you. The information is always what you are searching for. And it's the intent you give that energy that defines whether it is used for right action or not. And it is inside these sacred spaces that you will be reminded that you are a god, that you are a bright star.
So what you're trying to do is move through the course without ricocheting off walls or creating karma. You're trying to slide through things smoothly. How do you do that? It's called flowing. There's a technique that you can do that will allow you to touch some part of your inner being that has more knowledge than your conscious state does.
During my service in the United States Congress, I took the initiative in creating the Internet.
We still need highways and water lines, but we also need communications lines that can allow us to take advantage of the high-performance computers.
I had the exciting opportunity to get to know some of the scientists and engineers that were working on it back then, and they shared with me their expectations that it could very well grow into a much bigger thing than it was back in those days.
Under the leadership of Vice President Gore, we've used information technology to bring government closer to citizens in many ways.
What we call the Internet today really began in the Defense Department, and in the early 1960s, scientists and engineers sent the first digital messages from one computer to another. And then there were changes in laws that enabled that to spread more widely. And of course now it's a full-blown global phenomena that's absolutely changing the world.
So let me describe the events that took place at the time of the birth of the Internet. Here at UCLA, we had a time-shared computer, which was a Scientific Data Systems Sigma 7. And it was serving the population of undergraduate and graduate students here as well as the faculty. Just a computer running time-sharing in the 60s. When we decided to create this network, the idea was to build a switch, which we called an interface message processor. And that was delivered to us on the Labor Day weekend from Boat Baranek and Newman back in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's the size of a refrigerator. It's what we now call a router. At that time we called it a packet switch because it was using and implementing the packet switching technology that I had developed as a graduate student at MIT. So on September 2nd, the day after Labor Day, we connected this switch to our Sigma 7, and bits began to flow immediately. Everybody was there that day wondering, will it work? And everybody was ready to point the finger at each other if it didn't. Happily, it worked just fine. The next day, we had messages moving back and forth. So this was UCLA, and the time was September 1969. A month later, up at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, another imp arrived in October, and shortly thereafter, they connected their host computer, which was a PDP machine, Program Data Processor machine, a digital equipment machine, to their imp. So this is Stanford Research Institute, SRI, and the period is October 69. So we decided that we would log on from our machine to their machine. And the idea was we'd sit down as if we were a local user on this machine and log on through the network to that machine. Of course, we needed a communications link, and so the first piece of the backbone network ever on the internet was that line from UCLA to SRI. And so on October 29th, 1969, one of my programmers, Charlie Klein, and I were in this room. We decided to log on to this machine. Now, to log on, one has to type in, whoops, let me use another color if I may. One has to type in LOG, and the remote machine will type in the IN. So our job simply was to type in LOG. Now, up at the other end, there was another programmer waiting to watch all of this. And we had a telephone connection between these two. Telephone connection so they could talk to each other. And what happened is, Charlie typed the L, and he asked, "You get the L?" And the answer was, "Got the L." He typed the O. "You get the O?" "Got the O." He typed the G. "You get the G?" Wacko. The system crashed. This machine went down. So the very first message on the internet ever was low, as in lo and behold. You couldn't ask for a better, more effective message. Now, a month later, another imp was delivered to University of California, Santa Barbara, and they connected their host in, of course. And we had a couple more lines connecting these imps together. And this was in November of '69. And a month after that, a fourth imp was deployed at the University of Utah. And they connected their host computer in. So we had, again, this was December '69. So we had a 4-node network running, and we began to test it and find out what some of the problems were. And we could break this network anytime we wanted. We found faults. We had BBN fix it, etc. So this was the beginning of the internet. You might say that on September 2nd, when this first connection was made, the internet took its first breath of life. And when this message was sent from UCLA to SRI, you might say that the infant internet uttered its first words. The interesting thing is that we did not have a prepared message to send. If you remember that Samuel Morse had a terrific message, "What hath God wrought?" And Alexander Graham Bell had, "Come here, Watson, I need you." And Armstrong said, you know, "A giant leap for mankind." Those guys were smart. They understood about public relations and media. They had the press, they had TV in the cases where TV was around, they had recordings, and the record is there. We have no record of this. There was no camera, there was no recording, there was nobody present except the few of us doing this simple connection. We do have a written record of it in a log that we kept, and I'll be happy to show you that log, which records that very first message. In this box, we have probably the most precious document regarding the history of the internet, and it contains the original IMP log in which we recorded the events that took place in those early days. We started recording this in October, and we have the entries by the programmers and the software developers. And the most important entry in this document is shown right here. On October 29th, 1969, at 10:30 in the evening, Charlie Klein put in the entry, "Talk to SRI host to host." That's the record of that first message, low, that was sent between us and SRI. This is the only document that exists to record the birth of the internet.
Hey, welcome you epic being. Thank you as always for allowing me to be a part of your journey. Andre Hodge, Infinite Potential Healing, Servant of Truth. It's always a great privilege and honor to me be this offer of information and stepping into the leadership of teaching and sharing information and having that journey and my journey to get to this point, to feel comfortable to be able to ideally offer stuff that isn't out there. I'm not here to repeat stuff and just echo everything else that's been said. I want to push the boundaries of the what is going on, to be an ally to you and then all of us, to get a comprehension of everything going on, to have the context foundation to perceive the what is going on, not the what is the narratives are offering and all those sort of things, all those compromised beings that might be in alignment to what's going on in a very masterful, very high level, very intelligent apparatus and scales of things that is just so far beyond what most can comprehend. So I really aim to fill that gap and empower you with some very potent information to help you organically realize it yourself, not me by putting on a plate and telling you this is the way it is. I really always offer data for you as a very potent being, whether you feel it or believe in yourself or not, to self-accept that maybe you're the one that we've been waiting for. And if you step into that space of not allowing glass ceilings, of maybe I'm the one, maybe I can do it, and I've just tried to offer the leadership in that, and everything I do, especially getting into the healing and the sovereignty sort of stuff, it's all meant to be an ally to what I feel is engage our superiority to all this, to be the solution mechanics, to be the solution to it. Because I really don't feel that if we accept society how it is, it's not sort of designed to have the solutions in it. It's designed to sort of keep us in it and orchestrate stuff on a level that most can't comprehend. So then it comes down to, I feel me engaging my multi-D intuitive potential to be the superiority to everything going on, because what I feel about, and this is going to be quite interesting with that, and it's going to touch on it, it's going to offer many variables of what I've offered over the years with the influences and our multi-dimensional method to the 3D madness and influences and emotional mastery and our intuitive potential and infinite potential healing. I've done a couple of releases on those themes in recent times that I'll do a lot more on. They were just touching bases on things, but I feel the solution isn't in society. We have to be courageous and engage a level of ourselves that's not really endorsed, all right? Even in the spirit and alternate community, to me, a lot of that is set up to derail us, and I'll get into things like that. It's sort of like leading us into this utopia, sort of longing for something that we don't have to be something other than what it is now, and that carrot on the stick of something else. It's all, there's many streams leading to that, which ties into what I've said about the update part 2 and what I feel is going on in the Middle East and related to the UN and all that sort of stuff, which I'm not going to get into this one. I'm releasing this probably in my normal time, but I'm thinking of doing an update in between when this is released and then, but I'm doing this one before I do that, so perhaps I've offered an update of those more current events and things relative to that. But this release, what I'm going to be doing is part 2 in my Multidimensional Internet Apparatus theme that I offered. I just checked, it was late July 2025, part 1. And it was about the 20th century societal setup for now. And what that release was offering was a really, really amazing sort of interview with a guy by the name of Anthony C. Sutton. You probably never heard of him and stuff. And I always honor those people that came before the internet. And if you know my history, I've always shared a lot and stuff. But I really got going in 2008 on, and the YouTube was still not owned by Google and stuff like that, and Google had Google videos, and YouTube was just fantastic. It was like built for wildfires of truth to come out, and there would all be the top 10 of what everyone's watching and stuff like that. It was just a vastly different zone or space than it is now, right? And it was very easy to get onto these people like Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden and stuff, and I exhausted all those people like David Icke and Michael Desarian and Jordan Maxwell and all those sort of people, and then I appreciated that there was different eras, so I went back, and this release will include one person that I discovered, and it was going through Art Bell and the Coast to Coast AM, and that was in the 90s and the early 2000s, sort of about 10-15 years, and it was really riding on the inertia that the X-Files brought out, and that was just, if you were there, it was such a massive thing, and just like wanting the truth, right? The truth is out there. That was the theme, right? And then I always really honored the people before that. And there was just this really amazing era of people, Andrei Paharic, Marcel Vogel, Dr. Bob Beck, and I've included him in some of my releases. I think the early Our Intuitive Potential or Infinite Potential Healing releases, and he was really big in creating technology relative to the brainwave sort of stuff, and really genius sort of scientists and stuff that would create things relative to consciousness and stuff in an era that was just, it was very taboo to be into all this stuff. We don't know how easy we have it compared to them. And I've talked about my meditation teacher and stuff, Rose Penn, and she was like Yoda, and she would do a reading on everyone after a meditation, like 30 to 40 people. It's just really fascinating to witness all that stuff when I was young, and a lot younger than now, right? 18 years ago, it's crazy. And so there was always this era of different people that came through and stuff, and so I really honor those people in that different era, and Bob Beck and Andrei Paharic and Marcel Vogel and all that group of people that came from the era before Art Bell and Coast to Coast when it really got going. And there's this archive on archive.org of Bill Jenkins' Open Mind Radio, where it's just like this real amazing like archive of those people. And the Crystal Skull Part 1, and the guy that I put in there, he was on there and stuff like that. And that era of people, they just had to really be really good at what they did and stuff. And I really appreciate that. And Dr. Robert Beck talked about Bob Becker, and he'll be mentioning this and stuff. And so there's a lot I want to include in this theme. But what I'm getting to is all these people have offered little dots and stuff like that of the pattern of information and that. And I feel very fortunate to be here now, to be able to just easily access all the information and stuff, and then find these people and all that. So why I was saying all that overview of the people in the community over the years and stuff like that, that release, Part 1, offered this big overview of society, right, over the last, say, from the 20th century to now. But it was that recording was done in 1984, and so it was sort of in the middle of some of the eras that I'm going to be talking about now. But it was talking about the setups for society, and the Cold War was sort of set up, right? So I really highly recommend going and watching that. Anthony is a phenomenal researcher and courageous provider of books and all that in that era that was very tough, right? It was very hard legwork and not a lot of progress. Today we can just go on the internet and find a lot of stuff in spite of how it is, right? But those eras, they just had to chip away and required a lot of effort. And you know, it's just I really appreciate how it was then and how fortunate we are now. And we've got this sort of window with the Multidimensional Internet Apparatus where I can connect with you, I connect to people different parts of the world, and we can find each other, where these people, they didn't have that. And so there's this structure called the internet that we all have, and it's there, and it's very beneficial on many levels. What I'm wanting to offer is, in this theme, is it's like a skeleton of the structures that are going on. And I feel we've got this window to do something about it. And there's many things like the World Economic Forum and 2030, 15-minute cities and all those sort of things. And I put a lot of effort into my Sovereignty Declaration Part 5 that's out. And again, what this release will be is offering, instead of like one big overall thing of Anthony Sutton, what I'm going to be doing is offering different teachers with their own variables of a pattern. I might just show the pattern recognition image that I've shared in the past. It hasn't been a while. It's been a while since I've shared it though. So I'm not sure what this release and title will be. It might be about the military-industrial complex, because one of the teachers and clips I want to offer was by a guy by the name of Dr. Jack Cruz, and he's fascinating. It sort of popped up into my awareness when I was going through being a bit thorough on the first video that I'm going to be offering, right? But all these teachers I offer, and I'm going to be offering 3 teachers. One of the names is Eleanor Freeland, and it's going to be a clip from a lecture about synthetic biology in 2019. It's hard to believe 2019 is 7 years ago, right? But it was, you know, the significance of that day and what was coming, and what I felt. I had this instinct of something was brewing, and the urgency, we needed to get up to speed ASAP. And that's where I was just totally committed to all this stuff, because I feel like we're very vulnerable and there's a huge gap. So me and my journey, my leadership is to trying to fill that gap and create the accelerated awareness by offering all these information and all these different themes. And ultimately, I feel, like I said, the solution space is employing our intuitive potential and getting into a lot of what I'm going to be offering in this theme, touching base on it in these components that I'll be offering. But I feel the main target is the system knows that our intuitive potential is a threat, and it always has been. So a lot of the high frequency sort of stuff is very detrimental to that. So you have to be willing to really develop those intuitive muscles and not be frail and weak and woe is me and all this sort of stuff. It's, if say you take on board that I say our intuitive potential, employing say the mechanics cipher about 1000D and all that sort of stuff, I feel us, organic to the pure source origin of our universe and being native to this universe rather than the invaders or the compromised source code and stuff like that, which I'll get into in another video. We organic to our source of a pure nature, we have superior mechanics that can checkmate everything. The key is we've got to, like, my thing has been the discovery and the journey and the commitment to working all this stuff out, to putting it on a plate, because it's not pleasant to contemplate, but we are in a war, right? And a war we don't know, and a lot of people like retreat and go into fear of accommodating the society that we're in and stuff, and it's just fascinating. And what I try and do is inspire you to go beyond that and engage that superiority, and then we can see that all that's done to grind us down is the fear of them, of us, right? We're not bad, we're not negative, it's just they're invalid, right? And they're using all our energy and all this sort of stuff, right? So this video, getting off my big scale soapbox, right? Because it's more about the lower levels in the narrative, and I'll just show you a few of the images quick, right? But this is a metaphor of everything, of all the dots, but each of these teachers have their own pattern that I'm going to be offering that ideally will very much complement everything I've said. And this is in the multidimensional internet apparatus space, but it will relate to everything else, right? And hopefully it will give you more depth and appreciation in the context, right? Just wanted to show this up front. I might show the context image and a couple other ones quick, right? So ideally, you now, before you've seen this, and the you that is you that studied this, maybe take notes, watch it on a computer rather than a phone, or in another way that's for like a study rather than just entertainment and that. But just ideally I'm going to arm you up a little of the context dots, right? To be able to see what's going on, see how it all relates at a bigger scale, and how everything is just, there's been a journey from the Cold War and the society and, you know, structures of society and the military industrial complex, that this is going to get into it at the end, which is going to be profound, right? And to be armed up with the truth, and if you've really invested in all I've said about the sovereignty, energy hygiene, and the data that I'll offer, it will be very potent for your energy field and your psychic defense and all this sort of stuff. And to find that sweet spot to navigate it all in spite of the vastness of the apparatus that most don't even comprehend we're up against, alright? So I just wanted to show you that and help arm you up with what I'm going to share in this, alright? This image is about the scales of image that I appreciate and employ to offer the vastness of who we are and stuff like that. This is more getting into the societal stuff that impacts us. It's not so much aligned to the bigger scales, you know, the 1000D and origin of source and stuff like that, but it all relates, it all trickle back. So it's more focused on that space again, right? But ideally this will help translate what's going on and fill a lot of gaps and add a lot of depth to things, right? So this is the image, an image set I use relative to the narrative and the different layers of it. And I won't get into it too much, but so the healing and the truth and 1000D and invasion is the highest level sort of stuff, and intuitive potential and all that. This is more like the second and third layers, like the first three. So the first layer of the narrative of society that most accepts. The second layer is like the BS going on and all this sort of crap and this behind the scenes, and then getting into just beyond that with all the multi-D sort of stuff and technology and all that for control and all that. And in my opinion, a lot of it's targeting the intuitive breakout, right? And so it's just a bit of an overview of that, right? To give you context for what I'm going to share here. And I'm just going to move on. So this is the second part of that image set relative to the narrative and the different layers of it. And in update part 2, I talked about the subjective nature of existence now, of dealing with people and stuff, and the lack of will to accept the bigger, perhaps an uncomfortable variable that goes beyond the data sets and information components or dogmas that people have a foundation that they're relying on to give society context and meaning, and it's very courageous to accept this information, particularly the multi-D sort of stuff. It's not appreciated, and you're a bit of an outlier, but to me we're vulnerable if we do not have the will to accept the greater perception going on. So a lot of my information is to challenge that and invite people to entertain a bigger level of comprehension, right? So again, I'm going to be challenging that. And I'll invite you to go beyond what you're previously accepted into the unknown, right? It's an ally to your intuitive potential. Because this is what happens. If there's variables in the higher levels of the narrative that you aren't willing to accept, then you're potentially vulnerable to it, and the people around you are as well. And that's where I'm just going into the leadership of all this. So I invite you to go beyond what you're willing to accept or accommodate with others around you, and step into that space of your unknown and lead, right? Lead in your awareness journey, right? So I'm going to get into the main components of this, and I might have cut a section out of the intro part that I've offered and offered that at the end, because I went into a bit of the narrative levels and information and pattern recognition to sort of arm you up of how to approach this release and absorb the data into your body and your subconscious and have it there. And to me it will probably fill a lot of gaps or add a lot of context and add a lot of confirmation to the things that you sort of felt, but really interesting, right? So the main part of this release, part 2, and it will be probably about the Multidimensional Internet Apparatus, part 2, the military industrial complex, and maybe the Manhattan Project and how that relates, and it will be at the end. And I don't know how long that component will be, but it had a profound impact on me when I went through it earlier this week and stuff. And this internet theme I've been brewing for a while, and it's very foundational, like I've said, about society and all that sort of stuff. And potentially it has a lot of vulnerability in most of us that we don't know this stuff, and ideally me putting this all together is a very powerful ally for you navigating going forward, right? So there's three main people that I want to offer. I'll just do a bit of an overview and I'll talk in between the little clips. And just the randomness of searching, I came across this lady, Eleanor Freeland, and in particular I came across a lecture that she offered in 2019 called Synthetic Biology and Something Else. But what it was very, very good at doing is offering an overview of many things. And she's put together a lot of components that sort of add context of what's gone on since 2020 and the massive setup for failure that we've all had, right? And this era now, like 6 years on, that's crazy, hey, right? 2026. And what I'm wanting to do is offer a history and build up to the more now stuff. But the reason why I'm offering this upfront clip is she talks about the SDI, this Strategic Defense Initiative, through the 1980s relative to the Cold War. So I offered about the Cold War in part one, but how that was all, the technology transfer was going on and stuff like that, right? And I've got a little bird just near me. Hey, buddy. And because that's about how the society was molded, right? And it goes beyond the narrative of what most people say about that era. It was the US against the Russians, and the Russians were baddies, and it's sort of a metaphor of what's going on now, but it was at a whole next level back then. And then the Cold War ended, like the Berlin Wall fell, and then Russia fell, or the USSR fell and stuff like that. So but the SDI was all about dealing with the potential for nuclear war, right? And then there's been someone I've known about since Art Bell, and he was very popular. His name's David Adair, and I believe he's been on with Kerry Cassidy at Project Camelot a fair bit, and Cliff High doesn't like him because they talk about the Internet of Bodies sort of stuff, and they talk about stuff beyond what Cliff High thinks AI is, because he was a coder and it can't be better than him sort of thing and stuff. So it was quite interesting when I haven't paid much attention to Cliff High for a while, but he's been a thread throughout the last 15, 20 years of me, right? Going back to my trading days. But David Adair had a really big impact on the Art Bell with Coast to Coast AM in 1997 and 98. And doing my keyboard ninjaing with all the lectures and stuff like that. Obviously I went and looked for him, and he was at this place called the Granada Forum. And that was a really awesome place for people giving a space to do really powerful lectures and stuff, and a lot of the stuff that they released isn't out there anymore, unfortunately, and there's some people that I'd like to get, but my instincts going back to 2008 is that the internet is fluid. It's not always going to be permanent. You have to grab a copy of everything and stuff, and 2016 on, I think they got rid of Alex Jones on YouTube at 2016, and they started really cutting down and censoring everything and stuff, and it's hard to believe 10 years, right? But so a lot of channels that were out there that had real archives of all this stuff were lost, and we lost a lot of access to stuff, and it might be on other places like Odyssey or Rumble and that, and BitChute, and I've got my other BitChute channel and stuff, but yeah, David Adair, this lecture, and it was really cool because he gets into that era of the SDI, and he talks about that there's some really cool stuff that I'm not going to be including in this, and he was a genius. Like, I think the movie October Sky, which was a favorite. I haven't watched it for a while, but it's all about kid making rockets and meeting, like getting to NASA and making rockets and stuff. I think that's the metaphor of his story, if that makes sense. Because that movie came out in 1999 and this stuff was in 1997 and stuff. And what David Adair was about was the technology transfer of what they worked out in NASA and bring it into society and stuff. So I talk about that. I offer a clip relative to a bigger lecture relative to that because it's interesting. I was going to tie in Sabrina Wallace, so I might use that clip in the future, but this is going to be a big download of a lot of like 20 or 30 minute sections of different lectures of these people just to offer it, and you have a reference of them, and these things like the SDI and the World Wide Web and stuff like that. But the cool thing about the reason why I want to bring in David Adair, so it's like 2019 going back to 2020, sorry, it's 2019 and I'm going back to 1997 when he did this lecture. And he also talks about the origins of GPS, which are really interesting because when I finished school I went into surveying, right? I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went into surveying, which is the measuring of the ground using theodolites and stuff, because I was really good at maths and computer-aided drawing and stuff like that. And when we got into that in 1995, it was the sort of the origins of the GPS and surveying. They would use it and stuff. And the surveyor teachers that I had and stuff at that, it was a really tough course with high-level mathematics and stuff. And the second year of that, I did a module on computer networking, and that really sparked I read this Rolling Stone article about Apple, of the kids coming together to create Apple, and it was like really inspiring. And then I did this module on computer networking. I was like, wow, computers can connect together and share data. It was just like, wow. And in the 90s, there was all this massive inertia with the internet, and I was into records and going on the internet and all that, and it was all many ingredients for me to get into IT and stuff. But it was really fascinating because the lectures I had, they were talking about, they knew when the US were going to bomb because the GPS, when it originally came out, it had like this error rate of 200 meters. So it was inaccurate deliberately. So if their enemies would use it, then they were off 200 meters, like a error rate. But then when they were going to bomb, they knew it was accurate. So they knew when the Americans were going to bomb someone, right? So the Gulf War, he talks about that, and the GPS was employed. But the big thing that he talks about, and the reason why I'm offering him in this, is he talks about the SDI, what that was all about with Reagan, of setting up all these satellite networks for the communication infrastructure, right? If there was nuclear war, all the technology would be destroyed and they need a way to communicate. And then the Berlin Wall fell, and Russia fell, so the enemy to the Cold War wasn't there, and they invested trillions into, he said $500 billion, but back then it was obviously more and stuff, and they had all these satellites, and that was then switched to the public. It was not needed for that, and then that became the foundation to the World Wide Web, right? So it's really interesting. And then he talks about NASA being only governed by the Vice President of the US. And the cool thing is that during that era, that was Al Gore. And I might have included a clip at the start of him, how he was seen as claiming that he birthed the internet through all the things going on and stuff like that. So it was, I had this lecture of David Adair talking about that and joking about him, but I couldn't find it, which is interesting. So I don't know if something shifted and that's not in there anymore, but I remember watching the lecture that I had, but I didn't see it in there when I did the edit and stuff. So interesting variable about Al Gore, right? And then the third video was going to be of this really amazing doctor called Dr. Jack Kruse. And I sort of have been sitting on those other components for a while, and I went through the Eleanor video, and there's a section that I'll be including in the clip with under the section with hers, where she talks about Dr. Jack Kruse, talking about the electromagnetic spectrum and stuff, a quote from him. So I just thought, oh yeah, let's go have a look. And really, really cool. I found this really got into him quite a bit. And he's quite fascinating. When I talked about the narratives and stuff, he talks about the Manhattan Project and an interesting general behind that called Leslie Groves. And what he's offering is, he was in competition to Eisenhower, and the whole beware the military industrial complex was because Leslie Groves was behind the scenes doing a lot of his stuff that started sort of DARPA and all this sort of stuff, and was behind all that from Jack's perspective, and how that's all flowed on into the internet and DARPA and the search engines, which was Google, and how that has all been seeded through society and stuff like that. So he's literally a brain surgeon. He's a very fascinating guy, and he sits in the bit beyond the lower levels of the narrative, but I appreciate what it reminds me a bit of Dr. Richard Alan Miller, right? So I don't know how long that section is, whether I can actually do it or not. It's coming from another lecture or an interview and stuff. But he gives a really good overview with this awesome lady, and it wasn't really what she was about, but it reminds me of Richard Alan Miller, where he was on with Kerry Cassidy, and he just like bulldozes her a bit. He's not like that, but he's got a lot to offer, and there's other interviews that were very potent that I've watched, and I might look to build on this with him and many of the other things that he talks about. But he one of his mentors, sort of people that really helped him, because he challenged the medical system and offered a lot of stuff and has shared a lot of very potent information. He gets into Dr. Robert O. Becker, and he was into the body electric, and going back to the pre-Art Bell era that I talk about. He shares Dr. Robert Beck knew Robert O. Becker, and he was very challenging like the EMF stuff in the 70s and 80s, and gets into some submarine tech that I've got the clips I want to offer, but this is going to probably be too much with what I'm going to offer as it is, and I'll look to maybe take clips from the bigger components that I offer here to put another pattern together in the future with the context that I offer here. So what I want to do is offer the first one, and that's Eleanor, and it's about a 20-minute clip from her synthetic biology lecture that she offered in 2019. So there's a lot in this. Hopefully that context I offer will be very potent, so I'll leave you here, as I've been talking quite a bit already, and I'll see you on the other side. So enjoy. I hope you get a lot from this.
Thank you for coming tonight here in Portland. I'm Ilana Freeland, the author of several books, but the most recent were the 2014 book Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth, and the 2018 book Under an Ionized Sky, From Chemtrails to Space Fence Lockdown. Both books are available. The Under an Ionized Sky is 25, and the Chemtrails, HAARP is 20. I'm writing the third book now. It'll be, I hope, the last one I'm writing in this series. And this one is it's on synthetic biology, but in order to cover the synthetic biology, I need to cover a whole lot of things, because this is, to my knowledge, the first time that the environment has been utterly weaponized in order to produce effects on human health and the health of the planet and its creatures. So I have to handle a lot of things in order to show just how the synthetic biology assault on all of us is going to work. And I don't even need to use the future tense, is working. Okay, so this is just something a person sent me that took a picture This is from Mein Kampf. In the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily. And this is an important quote. It's attributed to Hitler, but I think it sounds a lot more like Goebbels, his propaganda minister. And this is why I've really come to the fore on this particular topic. I mean, you know my history. I was a Waldorf teacher. I gave many presentations on education. I've done a lot of things in life, a really interesting life. But this idea of the endless deception in my culture that my Romanian grandmother felt was the greatest country on earth because of how she had been persecuted in Romania, it really bothers me deep down. So I have spent a lot of time and thousands of hours and at least hundreds of books studying the problem of deception in the United States from the Cold War on. And the reason I say the Cold War is I was born in 1947, so my basic coming of age has happened within the Cold War, and therefore I'm a good person to talk about it and analyze it. This is a valuable quote to me. I wanted to illuminate the whole earth. There is enough electricity to become a second sun. Light would appear around the equator as a ring around Saturn. This is the reason that I have the illustration on the cover of the book. That ring is real. It is even at this moment there and being added to every time rockets, sounding rockets, go skyward and spew out the back the nanoparticles of heavy metals. The same heavy metals that when they fall earthward, we are breathing and are in our blood, our organs, our tissue, and our brain. Thought I'd play a little bit, just a little, of the boasting of Lockheed Martin, my nemesis. I know a lot about Lockheed Martin now, and I like it even less than I ever did. Lockheed Martin owns all the patents for the space
no longer
fence.
a vast, empty void. Unprecedented quantities of new satellites, derelict satellites, and debris litter the skies, posing an imminent threat to America's space assets.
Right in the mic.
Lockheed Martin's Space Fence System is a ground-based system of S-band radars designed to greatly enhance the Air Force space surveillance network. It provides unprecedented sensitivity, coverage, and tracking accuracy, and contributes to key mission threads with the ability to detect, track, and catalog small objects in low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and geosynchronous orbit. In a word, Space Fence will revolutionize space situational awareness. It offers assured surveillance coverage for improved custody and features the capability to develop long arc tracks for accurate initial orbit determination and differential correction, while simultaneously maintaining a persistent surveillance volume. In today's ever-expanding space environment, Space Fence improves the accuracy and timeliness for association, propagation, and orbit improvement. It features an open architecture net-centric design. The closely coupled radar signal processing and mission processing suite improves accuracy, discrimination, and timeliness for detection of closely spaced objects, breakups, maneuvers, lost object location, launch, attitude change, and conjunction assessment.
Conjunction assessment. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It takes a whole 6 minutes, and it's just endless boasting on what the Space Fence is, yes, from space. It certainly is the things that, if you can read the obscure language and the advertising language of it, and read between the lines, you see that the space fence is really there. And it is above the Earth, but it has a very big ground installation infrastructure. And that's really what the book is about, the Under an Ionized Sky. The ground base is important because when I wrote this book and spelled out how the space fence was created, near Earth orbit and on the Earth, I had not yet realized how it would telescope down into even more of an assault upon our lives. And that will be coming through the smart city concept of the UN. So this is really crucial. Yes, I've moved beyond the space fence, but the space fence is what we're living in. And for those who haven't read the book yet, it's really, the space fence is straight from the SDI program, the Strategic Defense Initiative of the 80s, and it is the Star Wars program. So now with the ionized atmosphere, the Star Wars program can be taken up again with a vengeance, along with the telescoping nature of a tinier world than the space fence concept above the Earth, and even the radar installations, the cell phone towers, the NexRad golf ball looking radar installations, etc., to what I will call, for want of a better term, the smart city. And this is what the next book will be about. It'll be going into that tinier world of the lockdown that we are still subject to. So here's a patent for that ring around the planet, and I'll just read you the abstract of it. A method for modifying environmental conditions is disclosed herein. The method includes the step of deploying a magnetic climate control material to a local area in one of the thermospheres or exosphere. The magnetic climate control material deflects and absorbs rays of the sun. The magnetic climate control material affects temperature of a local area below the magnetic climate control material, and also global temperatures. The method also includes the ability for moving, manipulating, or removal of this ring. So that's what it looks like. And as I've said in other talks I've given, Billy Hayes, the harp man, who was so crucial to me understanding the space fence and how it worked, told me that if he were to say what the ring around the equator of the planet, the metallic, these are all heavy metals, nanoparticles, if he were to say what it was like, he would have said it was like a CD-ROM. So it is very much a recording instrument, but it has many functions, I'm sure. And this is the only thing I've ever seen approximating
Scientists have discovered a human-made barrier around Earth, protecting against the natural particle radiation in space. They believe the bubble was formed by very low-frequency waves, or VLFs. VLFs have been found to interact with the particles in space, affecting how and where they move. VLFs are used for radio communications, including with submarines, because they can penetrate deep into the ocean. The waves can also travel far into the environment around Earth. By understanding more about how VLF transmissions help shape our space environment, we learn more about this complex region surrounding us. The more we know, the more situational awareness we have to protect our satellites from natural radiation in space.
What is that? This architecture, actually this article came out October 3rd, very timely. Lockheed nets $163.9 million to support space-based infrared system. And that's really what we're talking about, is an infrared system. This also includes all the satellites going up that you've heard about. You've heard about Elon Musk's launch of many satellites, etc. This infrared system kind of looks like this. You can look at some of these satellites that are up there. Some of them are geosynchronous, some of them are rotating. You can kind of imagine a web or a net around the Earth from these satellites, from the transmissions, from the radio frequency waves, the microwaves that are used. So we are really encased in a web of influence, you might say. This is another web of influence. This is just a graphic of the smart city that is now here. Some of the smart cities have had a good start, like Dubai. Dubai has been around for years. We've heard about it, about the wealthy Middle Eastern city with everything that a CEO could ever want available. The laws being very lenient and the properties very plush and valuable. So now we're really starting the smart city push big time in America. Cities are getting on the bandwagon under the name of sustainable development. You'll hear that. And certainly my little town, Olympia, is probably not going to be much of a smart city, so-called, but it is also subject to the sustainable development requirements of the UN following the push for carbons. Can you see how this is working? They're using the climate change story and the environmental story to push for a restructuring for the globalization of planet Earth. And I have said before that this all follows from what investment analyst Catherine Austin Fitts calls the secret space program. Many, many dollars, trillions of dollars are missing from our budget. And it is possible that they have all been funneled into the secret space program that requires a different form of governance on planet Earth, and the smart city is a very big part of it. This is what it looks like if we could see it inside our smart cities, with all the different radio frequency waves and microwaves going every which direction, and the particulate matter that it takes in order to have such transmission feasibility and fluidity is huge. And these particles that give a way for all these waves to move are being breathed in by us, and they are not good for us. I'm going to show a few pictures of I just would like you to become a little familiar with how the electromagnetic spectrum can be interpreted in a variety of ways. We, as you see there with this very small bit right here, right up here, this is our visual field that is now optically available to us, while all of this and this is not visual for us. But now we have the instruments by which all of these different levels of radiation, ionized and non-ionized, can be detected. And this, unfortunately, is being used for power and not for teaching the public how not to endanger themselves and their children and their grandchildren. So it goes. Here again, to memorize these, some of them, like 1 hertz, these definitions, 1 cycle per second, go to kilohertz, 1,000 cycles per second, megahertz, 1 million cycles per second, 1 gigahertz, 1 billion cycles per second. As you know, the 5G that we're all frantic over now is in the gigahertz, 30 to 300 gigahertz. This is deadly for us. And then finally the terahertz, 1 trillion cycles per second. Can't even wrap my head around that at all. But that will be 6G. That is already beyond the drawing board stage. He who controls the electromagnetic spectrum on Earth controls the living things on the surface of the planet. Jack Kruse, neurosurgeon. There's the millimeter waves. We know that's 5G. Here's the terahertz and 6G. Because yes, we're moving up to the terahertz now. Notice that the terahertz is very good at plasma oscillation, intermolecular vibration, intramolecular vibration. You suppose the 6G is really about penetrating deeper into our bodies? No, they wouldn't do that. And here's David Petraeus. One wonders what his destiny is all about. Items of interest will be located, identified, monitored, and remotely controlled through technologies such as radio frequency identification, sensor networks, tiny embedded servers, and energy harvesters. All connected to the next generation internet using abundant, low cost, and high power computing. Yes, this is where we are now. This is what's going on constantly, though you are probably not aware of a lot of it, would be my guess, because you don't understand what it would look like. Understandable. Now I'll kind of hearken to the past, the very famous As Above, So Below by Hermes Trismegistus, a very esoteric law that is coveted by esotericists, of which we have many in the secret space program. We remember this. May have looked ridiculous to many of you, but it definitely sent a message to some of the more esoterically minded brethren who are making a fortune off of our ignorance and abuse. It's like Sauron, right? And of course they fed us that as fiction, right? Pre-programming, fiction. Lord of the Rings. Fun fiction.
Hey, welcome back. Thank you for making it to this point, and I hope that very potent 20-minute clip from Eleanor Freeland is very beneficial to you. She offers a lot of components, but as I said before, I offered this. It was about the SDI, Jack Kruse talking about the EM spectrum, and the smart cities, and the Starlink with Elon. If you've gone to my Facebook, I offered a little couple-minute clip about all the satellites in space around us and stuff, and I think he's got maybe 8,000 or 9,000 at the moment, but looking to have 40,000. And there's people like Amazon with Jeff Bezos wanting to do a couple 100,000, and even Bill Gates wanting to do his own thing. And so there's just going to be like a massive amount of satellites with all their frequency stuff beaming at us. And she's talking about the EM smog and all that sort of stuff, right? But SDI, she drops SDI. And there's also a clip about Palantir with Lord of the Rings. And the Palantir is those globes, right? That if you remember the movies, like Gandalf says they're compromised linking up to Sauron and stuff. And Palantir is one of the big companies out there. And I won't get into that now, but that's something interesting, right? So I want to just move in because it's already going to be quite long. So before I offered the Eleanor clip, I talked about this David Adair guy. And so it's the Eleanor stuff is 2019. This is going back to 1997, right? When he was pretty big, and he's still there. But he talks about up until there and the SDI that got released to be the World Wide Web and GPS and all that sort of stuff, and the technology transfer and all that sort of stuff. And when I originally got this, I was wanting to link it up to Sabrina Wallace. This is going to be too big to overlap with Sabrina Wallace, but I might take that clip in the future and link it up to her with where we are now sort of thing. But the Eleanor clip was very potent to offer a bit more of the context now, to give the history and all that. So what I'm going to do is offer the David Adair clip now. So this will be about another 20 minutes or so. He's pretty cool, right? And there's a lot more I'd like to offer with him as well, and we'll see what happens in the future. But he was like a prodigy genius kid that made like this rocket that basically used a black hole, right? And he was doing the maths like at 7 or in his teens that was on par to Stephen Hawking, and he met Stephen Hawking, and they collaborated for a bit when he was young, right? But I won't include that clip because they were relating to each other in the dream time with the maths, right? It was really fascinating. But I just want to offer you this clip that's very potent here that gets into the whole SDI and the origin of the World Wide Web, right? So I hope you get a lot from this. I'll see you on the other side, right? Enjoy.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the forum. Little green men and rocket scientists. Wow, do the two go hand in hand? I bet there's a lot more there than you realize, and I bet you're going to find out a lot of things tonight that you never even suspected or guessed. This evening that we're pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Mr. David Adair, to the Granada Forum. He's conducted his own Need to Know conference. He is a top rocket scientist. He's an international space consultant. He's an internationally recognized leader and expert in space technology. And he will be speaking to us about how he and other select individuals testified under oath before a U.S. Joint Senate and House hearing in Washington, D.C. on April 9th of this year. The subject dealt with their first-hand experience with UFOs and extraterrestrial phenomenon intelligence in top-secret Air Force base known as Area 51. We'll also learn about other space programs. Additionally, Mr. Adair will talk about his new book, America's Fall from Space. This recounts the story of the U.S. space program from Wernher von Braun's beginnings building the V-2s for Nazi Germany to the horrible Challenger incident. As a rocket scientist child prodigy, he was taken by the government to work on the Navy's newest jet engines, later becoming a space technology consultant who crossed swords with NASA when he learned of the corruption and the technical problems that the Challenger shuttle faced prior to its launching. Also included will be a brief recounting of his recent experience at the Roswell 50th anniversary celebration, where he was an invited guest speaker. This is sure to be a most enlightening presentation, and questions can be asked regarding Little Green Men afterwards. Now please join me with a great big Granada Forum welcome to Mr. David Adair.
Well, as we have seen that, well, let me ask some questions first. I need to know a few things here. How many people heard me on Art Bell last night? Golly, about half the room. Wasn't right. It was night for last. At 3 a.m., I lost track. I don't know. Y'all's radio programs go run a little different than we do back home. We roll up sidewalks about 10 o'clock at night, and that's it. As you can tell, y'all, I'm from Georgia, so we got to get some proper English first. Y'all is singular, all y'all is plural. Okay? All right. And you thought this was going to be a dry lecture from a rocket scientist, didn't you? Yeah. Wrong answer. How many people here saw, well, maybe I should back up for a minute. You remember the last time I was supposed to be here? Well, some of you are going, no. Well, anyway, for those who didn't know, I was supposed to be here, what was it, last month? Sometimes, boy, see how good I am? Well, what happened was, this is the little guy that caused the problem. This is my planner. I gotta get a bigger planner. I had wrote your date in here for Friday, the next night. So I had Friday off, and I went down Sunset Boulevard. But anyway, I wrote my wrong date in the wrong place. I do that about once every 10 years, and I was 12 years overdue, so y'all got it. So normally that's not a problem. I work things out with clients and stuff, but what I wasn't ready for was the reaction, because I guess y'all really take a lot of things seriously here. Let me give you a background on what I do. I work as a TTC, that's a technology transfer consultant, and you might wonder, what is technology transfer? Well, it's, in my particular case, it's where I take an existing space technology, something that we had built out in orbit to be used out there for a need or a service or something that we had to get done. I come along and I look at that and I go, wow, I wonder how I can redesign that and apply it into commercial applications. So the company I have is called Intersect. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Now you know where I got that y'all's accent. But anyway, in my company, what I do is I do a transfer. So the best way to describe that, maybe I should give you an example. See, right here you have John Young. This thing right here that we have stuck on John's neck is a sensor, and it'll pick up blood pressure, pulse rate, respiratory functions. We tape them all over the body. The information is then sent from orbit back down to ground by telemetry, and the doctors sitting there can look at the astronauts' blood pressure, pulse rate, respiratory functions, and all the vital signs. I was looking at that and I was going, wow, you know what we could do with that? So we micro-miniaturized the process down. And let's say you just had a head-on collision out here or a car wreck, which I think that might be a very common event around here from what I've seen in traffic today. But there's been a really tremendous impact. So the people are injured, they're dying from the crash. The paramedics come sliding up to the rescue. They throw open this little suitcase. They hook the leads onto the person laying in the street. The information is sent from the paramedic units to a local hospital by radio waves, the doctors look at the scope and they're looking at the blood pressure, the pulse rate, the respiratory functions, all the vital signs. The doctor will tell the paramedics what to do to stabilize that person if you get them to a trauma center, and that's where those suitcases came from. That's technology transfer. So it's where we take stuff and redesign it. I can give you some more maybe practical applications, maybe not so drastic. Let me tell you a story. On the Apollo spacecrafts, those things are not very big. They're about the size of a good broom closet. You got 3 men in there. Okay? So they are eating solid food. Okay? It's 3 days out, 3 days back, 2 days on the moon. It's about 8 days. So after about 3 days of eating solid food, what's going to happen, y'all? Something's got to give, you know. Okay, well, you got another problem. It's weightless. Things float. You begin to appreciate this problem, right? It will get your attention, I guarantee you. So anyhow, there are no bathrooms on board. They wear diapers. So we had to build a very special diaper that could absorb nasty stuff away, keep them dry while they're still there, and hold things together. Okay? Technology transfer called Johnson & Johnson. You get the disposable diaper, and that's where it came from. That's technology transfer. Now, it goes on, and we can go for hours and hours. There are about 72,000 transfer already occurred out of the space program into the commercial sector. And it's just influenced and intertwined in your life. You just couldn't believe how much stuff you use every day that you didn't even think about that came from the space program. So that's what technology transfer is. Now you might find that that's pretty useful, because in the space program, on the commercial side where I'm at, I don't work for NASA. If I worked for NASA, it would be like, which it is right now, we get along about as well as Arabs and Israelis do. All right, we are hostile competitors. They're in the bureaucratic cesspool. I'm over here in the commercial sector. So you can tell I don't get a lot of Christmas cards from them boys. But we're into making money and profits out there. And in return, we make products. Has anybody ever bothered to tell you what's the benefits of all this? You know, what could you possibly get out of that? Well, other than some Pampers and maybe little paramedic units, you may not really think very much about what you could get from the space program. But it's really a lot more effective in your life than you're even aware of. I'll show you that. We have something right here. This is a satellite that's being launched into space. Now, years ago, a president named Ronald Reagan, which we called him in our world Ronnie Reagan. Anyway, he came in there and he asked if there could be a communication system built that could withstand a full thermonuclear strike by the Soviet Union. That's about 4,000 warheads exploding at one time in continental America. It would be a very interesting day. So anyhow, to build a communication system on the ground, it would be really impossible, because the ground will be just absolutely blasted away by EMPs, electronic magnetic pulse. It would fry all your communications. So the only place we could go is space. So we built this communication system with these satellites. Rockwell International put them out, and we've got 6 satellites in 3 different orbits, and we ended up with about 18 satellites, and we put some additional satellites out there, and we've got them all in place. They formed this grid around the planet. Well, once we got that thing in place, and it was extremely expensive, what happened to the Berlin Wall? It collapsed. What happened to the Soviet Union? They collapsed. So the thing that we had built this $500 billion program for doesn't exist now. So you can't justify it. So what do? What any good little red-blooded bureaucrat will do, they dump it. So they dumped the system into the corporate side. And when we looked at the whole systems and we saw it coming, one of the smaller things we get off this grid right now is called World Wide Web and Internet. Yeah, that's what it was built for. We didn't build it for you to play on internet with. I mean, come on, y'all. Think about a massive system. We couldn't afford it in the commercial sector. The military built it for a communication system to survive a first strike nuclear attack. Now, what you're playing with out there is a pretty nifty system. But you think you're really big and bad on your little computer with the internet and web and talk to everybody in the world. That's kind of cool. But let me tell you something. You're only pushing less than 5% of that grid's capacity. What's in the other 95%? Good question. There is, in the commercial side, there is products and services coming that you're just not going to believe. One of the things that we can do with this system is the telecommunications. The way the system worked for the military, a ground user, such as a combat soldier or a military aircraft, can look onto any 4 satellites within the satellite grid. Those satellites will then initiate a search system where we will start locking onto the systems. And with that, we can tell whether you're a ground base or sea base or an air base object. We can tell how fast you're moving within a fraction of 1 mile per hour. We can estimate your ETA, the estimated time of arrival, within a millionth of a second, and all this acquisition data is occurring in 1 nanosecond, 1 billionth of a second. We're pretty fast out there with that. So anyway, once this system right here goes into effect, the first thing to happen, well, let me give you a little dates here. We got the grid in at the very last satellite parked in the system came online August 1st, 1991. What happened the next day? Gulf War, Kuwait is invaded. And we're all sitting there looking at this going, this is too good. God. Somebody write Hussein a thank you card. Oh, bless his little heart. He invaded that country. See, we want to test this grid. This grid is so powerful, there's no way to test it, really, unless you got a full-scale, real, live, honest-to-God war. Okay, well, you just don't go out and invent one of those. At least some of you might disagree with that. But I've been hanging around metaphysical people too long. They're messing with my head, I'm telling you. I can't even look at the newspaper normal anymore. My colleagues are looking at me and they go, let's say something, and I go, well, how do you know that doesn't transcend across the dimensional barrier to jump where you can maybe receive some kind of message from some kind of disembodied spirit out there, you know, and maybe give you some ideas? And they're looking at me going, David, what have you been smoking, you know? So I said, never mind. So anyhow, I'm kind of locked in the 3D world, but UFO Congress I just came from, the Congress, or the meeting before that was the Global Science Congress, so I've been pretty saturated already, and I'm starting to leak all these strange ideas. But anyhow, back to science. One of the first things we did with Grid when Hussein did that nifty little invasion was this system could now demonstrate its capabilities. A lot of this technology hadn't been used yet. Let me explain something to you, or ask you a question. I'm sure did anybody watch the Gulf War on TV? Stupid question. Who did not watch it? Bless your hearts. I'm with you guys. But anyway, y'all watched the Gulf War, and it was like one of the neatest, technological soap operas going on. All this technology we hadn't even tried yet. We've had different pieces of it come together, but not everything at one time. Believe me, we dumped everything we had at that guy. So, and if you thought about it, here you have an aircraft carrier sitting out in the Gulf, Persian Gulf. It fires a Tomahawk missile, a cruise missile. This thing goes sailing out of the ship, spreads its wings, and takes off. It's going to fly about 300 feet, sometimes as low as 100 feet off the ground, which that's about the height of a 10-story window. It's going to fly about 450 miles, like, what, from here to San Francisco? Is it about the same distance? Well, when you get there with it, you're going to go through Main Street in Baghdad, hook a right at the square, go down to the 2nd Street, turn left, and strike the second building on the left and go in that third window on the right. Got that? No problem. And we did. The military of Hussein is not quite as honorable as the way we do it. They build their central intelligence building in between a hospital and a school, sitting right in the middle. Can't bomb it, A cruise missile can come flying in the window, and the last thing you see is somebody standing out the window going, That's it. It's all over with. And take out that entire building without hurting the school, the hospital on each side of it. So, if you think about that for a minute, how do they do that? GPS, Global Positioning System, would allow the coordinations for us to be able to maneuver through all that system. Now, you might ask yourself, how come you don't hear about all this on national news? Good question. Do you know where the National Technology Transfer Center of NASA is? I know you think I'm making this up, but you can verify it real easy. The National Technology Transfer Center of NASA's divisions, their address is Jesuit College, Wheeling, West Virginia. What in God's name is the NTTC doing inside a Jesuit college? In the middle of nowhere. And I know it's nowhere because I was born just to the south of the place. Well, go ask the Pope of Pork Barrels, Senator Byrd. And that system was moved out of Washington, D.C. into that Jesuit college. Call 1-800-555-1212. Ask for the National Technology Center and Jesuit College in Wheeling, West Virginia, and they'll give you a 1-800 number, and you can talk to them. And ask them, what are you guys doing there? See what kind of answer they give you. It's the technology transfer system has been treated like an unwanted stepchild by NASA, because a president named John F. Kennedy had wrote an executive order ordering NASA to make available to commercial divisions the science technology that are discovered. They hate that. NASA hates being told anything. Do you know how NASA is built? Do you know how the structure works? Do you know who's in charge of the space program? Gore. The Vice President of the United States is in charge of the space program. It's been that way since one time Dan Quayle ran the space program. So, that's why they can't get their spelling right on the manuals down there. But anyway, it was designed that way by Senator LBJ when he was under President Eisenhower. He got Ike to set that system up, knowing that he will be a VP for sure, which he was. Then he built Houston so he could tell his voters, look what I brought you. Houston's never been needed from day one. You think that Cape can't do what Houston does? Of course they can. It's total redundant. It's politics at its worst. So you had this megalomaniac running around named LBJ that was doing this kind of system. So anyway, that is how the structure of the space program is set. And did you know this? This federal agency answers to no one except the executive office. Tremendous power NASA has. How so? Did anybody see a program called Day One? It lasted 1 month and they took it off the air. So it probably didn't surprise me. Did you remember it? I got a tape recording of something. Their first episode of their first session was a story about the FBI. The FBI, this is interesting, the FBI was doing a 5-year, multi-million-dollar undercover probe sting operation on all of the leaders of the space program. You know why? George Jeffs, let's see, now I know George, James Beggs. Anybody recognize that name? He's a former head of NASA. His assistant, deputy director, Jesse Moore, was the one that was in power when the Challenger exploded. Tom Brokaw got on there during the funeral. He said James Beggs could not be here. Jesse Moore's in power. James Begg is having a, forgot what he called it. He was on leave. He's on administrative leave. That was it. Pardon? The administrative leave, what it was, your leader of the space program had been indicted by the Senate. He was buying 7th grade rivets that holds the shuttle together, literally, paying 1st grade price, taking a 50-50 kickback from the supplier. It gets worse, y'all. It's unreal what goes on in the commercial divisions, or actually the bureaucratic divisions of NASA. So anyway, these sting operations were ready to prosecute. NASA walks into the FBI bureau in Washington, D.C., and they just tell everybody, he will squash this investigation. And they were ready to prosecute. And the paper trail goes to the executive office. The investigation was squashed. No charges were filed, all paperwork destroyed. Except for the two agents that did the undercover operations. They were so furious they quit the bureau. They went to Day One and turned the story over, and they broadcast it. I recorded it, got the tapes. No one has ever brought this up in the national media. That's a problem in the power that this agency has. They have an oversight committee. Oversight committee is a subcommittee on science and technology, but they do not control NASA. Only this agency has to report to the executive office. There's not another agency in the federal system that has that system set up, which means they are totally uncontrolled. I think you better start paying a lot more attention to NASA. There is a lot more going on that you don't know about.
Hey, welcome back. Thanks for making it to this point. I hope this up until now has been a very potent release for you, and it's been fascinating, right? It's awesome to have a bit of this information of context of what's been going on, right? So I'm just going to keep moving. I've already probably talked enough, right? So I want to offer my third clip, and it's by this Claudia, and it's a longevity sort of channel, right? And she's really awesome, and I don't think Jack was offering the information that she was wanting, but he went on he obviously had a lot to say, and it was a platform for him to get it across. And he's a really fascinating guy, like a brain surgeon and stuff, and he talks about like his journey and getting this aha moment, and it's very big relative to three main components he talks about: light, water, and magnetism related to our bodies. And then he was in the establishment and created a concept, and I'm not going to get into the biology of all his stuff, but he definitely reminds me of a bit like Dr. Richard Alan Miller. Richard is on another level, but that sort of character. And I find him inspiring, being brave, because obviously being a brain surgeon, he could have a very comfortable life and all this sort of stuff. But he talks about this 2005 moment where he went through an injury that challenged his paradigm, and it didn't add up. And this overview is really good, but what he gets into is basically the military-industrial complex that spawned post the Manhattan Project by a general by the name of Leslie Groves, which he was like the father of the military-industrial complex, and he was a competitor to Eisenhower. And when I heard it, it was fascinating. It was like something that I've never heard anyone talk about. I've not really known about this guy that much. There was a series called Manhattan, and there's been a movie that came out recently. I actually haven't seen that, but the series was pretty cool a couple of years ago now. And but I didn't really pay too much attention to Leslie Groves, right? So if you go back to part one of this series, I offered Anthony Sutton talking about the Cold War, sort of the whole 20th century leading up to now. So about last 120 years, if that makes sense, and all the revolutions in Russia and all the effort to transfer technology over to Russia, which is why the David Adair and the technology transfer into society is interesting and stuff, right? That Anthony Sutton is a bit more foundational. This stuff with Jack Kruse is a bit more above that in that realm, and it's not accommodating the data relative to what Anthony talks about, but it fits in to that to be able to offer where we are now, right? So it's a really good overview of stuff. Obviously there's more detail to go into and stuff, but Jack's a really good way he strings it all together in a very elegant and to the audience that we are, right, to be able to handle it, right? So what I want to do is offer that clip. I don't know how long it is. It might be about 30 minutes and stuff, but I offer like other information that I'll take away and use in other areas. But it's a really good introduction to him and an overview. So you guys that have made it to now, it's going to be a very like a great investment that you've made it to get to this point. And so what I want to do is just offer it, and I'll leave you here, right? And really enjoy if you never come across Jack Kruse before, because Eleanor offered a quote by him, and that's where I want to sort of tie it together with all these people, right? So it's an honor and privilege to be able to offer you Jack for the first time. I hope you get a lot from it, and I'll see you on the other side, right?
I'm your host, Claudia Van Berzelaga, here to bring you the latest insights and learnings to improve your health, life, and happiness for longer. My guest today is Dr. Jack Kruse, a neurosurgeon and a health expert who had an awakening in 2007 when he suffered a torn meniscus in his knee at 6'2" and 357 pounds. This led to his further study of physics, light, magnetism, and electricity. He ultimately concluded that modern science lacked a deep understanding of how humans function in relation to the natural world. He became well known for his work on the paleo diet and connection between the brain and gut health. He's also the CEO of the Kruse Longevity Center, where he focuses on helping people avoid common health issues as they age. His first book, Epi-Paleo RX, The Prescription for Disease Reversal and Optimal Health, was published in 2013, and he continues to share his insights. With years of experience, he shares insights on biohacking, sleep optimization, and even the impact of electromagnetic fields, EMF, on our health. Dr. Kruse aims to empower individuals to take charge of their health in a more holistic way. Welcome to the Longevity and Lifestyle Podcast, Dr. Kruse. Jack, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks.
So I'd love if you could share a bit more about your awakening following a torn meniscus in 2007 and how this changed your traditional approach from traditional medicine to looking at how physics, light, and biology are connected.
Well, the way in which the injury happened didn't make any sense from things that I had learned about in residency. And I decided to jump down a rabbit hole. I had a little push. There was an orthopedic surgeon's wife who was there that worked for a biotechnology company in California. Mm-hmm. And she told me, I think I know how this happened. I'd like to send you a book and 6 papers. And she gave me directions, actually, of I want you to read the book first and then the paper second. And the name of the book was Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And then the papers were all about a hormone called leptin. And I had never learned about leptin because it was discovered after I had finished my training. So it was kind of interesting. And I went down the rabbit hole, and I realized fairly quickly that she was trying to get me to light Big Pharma up. But instead, I decided to go a different way. My idea was what was present in the book. Was it possible in reality? And I went back to the medical school library in the town that I was practicing in. And magically, I found a pathway that leptin would act with. And that was called the melanocortin pathway. And I started to read some new papers and found out that leptin linked to this. In fact, the target of leptin was the melanocortin pathway in the brainstem. And one thing led to another. Went and probably read, I'd say this started in 2005 and then it went to 2007. Then I took my family on a trip to Europe, and I was standing at the foot of Michelangelo's statue. And that's when the eureka moment came through, where all the things I had read for 18 months actually came together at the foot of the statue. Why? I looked up at David and saw perfection from 500 years ago, and I looked at me and I said, well, I'm not perfect. And as I looked up to look at his behind, a thing of light came down from the cupola, and on the ledge of the cupola, if you've ever been to Florence, there was actually a bird sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
And it dawned on me right away, this is the KT event. This is the difference. It's light. Light is the whole deal between leptin and melanin. And then very, very quickly, when I got on the plane the next day to go back home on the Delta flight, I actually started to scribble in my quilt document, which is the first document that I ever wrote about this, and started to order things in terms of levees. Why? Because at the time I did my residency in New Orleans, and levees are how we protect the city. And I thought, well, this would be a good way to order the ideas of how do you protect yourselves with these 30 ideas. Fundamentally, that's where it came down, and the pillars of health are light, water, and magnetism, and you need to optimize all of them. Mm-hmm. And the irony for me was when this whole thing came to fruition, I realized these were the same three things that SETI for NASA looks for extraterrestrial life. Mm-hmm. And they actually have the same mode and mechanism. And the irony is they came to that in a completely different way than I did. But the fact that we both came to the same conclusion, I thought was actually kind of comforting, because they did it through their experimentations in space and space medicine. And I did it actually from a theoretical standpoint, really from a book and several papers. And then I would say my own N=1 on myself. So then I stood in front of my family very soon after this trip and told them I was going to employ this thing I came up with called the leptin prescription. And my brother-in-law at the time was sitting there, and I told him, I'll be wearing your jeans next year. And that was kind of a joke, because he was probably 185 pounds, 200 pounds, and I was 365 pounds at the time. Long story short, I think it was in 3 months, I lost 77 pounds. In 1 year, I lost 133.
Wow.
Then, of course, as a scientist, I didn't believe that this actually could fundamentally work. And I did it on my son. Then I did it on my nephew. And I had more success with the younger people than I even did with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided to make the next step, is people that I was seeing in my clinic as a neurosurgeon. I said, look, there may be a chance that I could potentially offset your surgery or potentially make your recovery from the surgery faster. And I told them a little bit about, what I was doing. And of course, a lot of people, they weren't interested. And the ones that were, we did it on, and they actually had spectacular results. So this started creating a buzz in the hospital. And eventually the buzz got so big all over the city that I was asked to do a TED Talk. And the TED Talk was done after me doing this for about 4 years in my town. And several of the doctors that were in my hospital started to send me patients who are not neurosurgical patients. They were people that had diseases that were difficult to treat. Most of them had been to like MD Anderson, the Mayo Clinic, Harvard, Stanford. And the hardest cases that were present in my community, I got a shot on. The people were open-minded, and we had a pretty spectacular result. So one of the gastroenterologists in the hospital told me, he goes, you got to put this stuff out there. He goes, you realize that this is not going to resonate with centralized medicine and peer review, because they're going to try to rip this apart. He goes, you're going to have to come up with a different plan. Prior to that, because like I said, this began for me in 2005. We're now in about 2010, 2011. Early on in the journey, when I realized that the physics of organisms was the key to understanding circadian biology, I went and visited a person who became my mentor. I mean, this is a person that I didn't physically meet, only through his books. And that was Robert O. Becker. And he was at the end of his life. And I sat down with him, and he told me what he faced with the industrial military complex And when you find a fabulous idea you think as a scientist or a doctor that people are going to meet, this progress with open arms, and that's actually not the truth. Why? Because the industrial military complex, and it turns out Big Pharma, who are partners in most things, and when you filter them down, they come through pretty much money and control. He just told me the way in which you do this, you need to be careful. So with that idea in mind, I began to do something that I don't think anybody else prior to me in medicine really did, where you try to educate, a swath of people on what really matters and then subtract out the superfluous. Because it turns out most of the things in centralized medicine, most of the things in longevity, they are superfluous. And the thing is, in order to get people to that level, you actually have to teach them what really matters, and then you have to teach them consistency and how to do it over and over and over. And the nice thing is with my work, the consistency part is not difficult. It doesn't cost a lot of money. Everything that I teach people is kind of free. With the exception is you may have to change the way in which you live your life, the way in which you do your job, the way in which you're a mother, a father, a caretaker, or even a surgeon. Like one of the big changes for me was we used to start our cases 6:30 in the morning. That changed. I didn't start any of my cases till 8:30 after that. Why? Because sunrise is a non-negotiable situation for me. And that's kind of how the process started.
It's beautiful, and especially how amazing to have a eureka moment in front of something so perfect like Michelangelo's David. So I've had the pleasure of also witnessing it as well, and for taking action. So really, thank you for your work in that space. Where would you say for people trying to understand, because as you said yourself, it is a industrial complex, if you will, of traditional medicine, and many people are understanding only one way of thinking. How do you explain to people who might be new to your methods and way of thinking?
Well, it's actually easier now. It's actually much easier now to have this discussion with people than it was, I'd say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, because of what everybody just went through with COVID. Here's the perfect example. The perfect example is the government narrative was that we should stay out of the sun, social distance, and do all these things. And we saw what an epic fail that was. And then they put the whipped cream and cherry on top of the sundae and said, look, the jab is the best way to go. And it turns out if you took the jab, boy, do you have a huge problem to deal with, now that the aftermarket data has come out. So actually, I think my message has gotten much, much easier for people, because what you have to realize is that you've been preconditioned, but not only by the system, by your parents, by schooling. Everything about centralized medicine is about precognition, meaning that you have been preconditioned to accept, what they tell you, and they're the experts and you'll do it. For example, when you go to see a doctor, no matter where you are in the world, whether it's Europe or the United States, if you don't get a prescription for it, you feel like, well, this was a waste of time. And that idea comes from the preconditioning you got. And when you begin to realize that the person who really preconditions everything in medicine, who gave doctors that idea, who doctors gave the patient the idea, that was Big Pharma. And that started at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. That started with the robber barons in the United States, who basically had one of their oil trusts broken up. And then from the breakup started the idea of Big Pharma, which started in New Jersey. And they started to use industrial chemicals to place in pharmaceuticals. And at the same time, how did they get physicians at that time who were much more interested in electricity at the time than now? Because electricity is a big part of light, water, and magnetism. They actually came up with a guy named Flexner to come up with a report. And in the report says, this is how we're going to fix schools. And what the idea of the Rockefeller Foundation at that time is, if we can change the curriculum, we can change the culture of medicine away from vitalism and then towards reductionism. And that's exactly how it happened. The problem is most people today, you're 130 years, 120 years away from that. You don't realize how all this went on. And there was a lot of politics around that. You had to know what else was going on. The Federal Reserve was beginning in the United States. There was a huge problem with the royal family in Britain. All these things played a role in terms of how it happened. Basically, slowly over a period of time, the paradigm for about 30 years was changed from 1911 to 1930s and 40s. World War II starts to break out. We have war. And then what is the single key moment that solidified that the Rockefellers would win? It was actually Alexander Fleming discovering penicillin. And when penicillin comes out, it's truly a miracle drug. It does things that no other drug's ever done. And what does that do? Kind of pushes everybody to the belief that there's a drug for every ill. And that was reinforced post-war America, post-war Europe. It was reinforced everywhere in the world. So there's other things that happened at that time. In the 50s, we get the idea that UV light's bad. Why? Because of a paper about retrolental hyperplasia in children. Because when they were born with, kernicterus or jaundice, they used to put babies in UV light. So that's where the babies all got better from the jaundice. But the interesting thing is they noticed that they started to have problems with their eyes. And that's actually where the first idea that UV light in the sun was somehow toxic. Again, nobody looked at the embryology of the eye, why this was a problem, or the fact that UV light from the sun never comes packaged by itself. It has 6 other colors with it. And then they changed from UV light and started to use blue light. And if you go back and look at pretty much any epidemiologic problem, most of the big diseases in the world start from 1893 when Tesla, Westinghouse, give us the power grid in the world. And we start plugging things into it, specifically light. And those lights are not similar to what the sun is. That's how the story starts. And the doctors who were marginalized by the Flexner report are basically thrown out of their academic positions. They're removed from medical schools. And you can see there's a whole culture change that goes on for about 50 years, which brings us to right around the late 1930s, 1940s, same time when Alexander Fleming does what he does. Another chap who you may have heard of, named Albert St. Georgi, wins a Nobel Prize for partially for the Krebs cycle and partially for vitamin C. The irony was he was right about vitamin C, but he was wrong about the TCA cycle, but it didn't matter. He was a brilliant guy, and he was a physician. He happened to give a speech in 1941 where Robert O. Becker, the orthopedic surgeon that I told you about in the beginning of this podcast, was there, and he made this comment in there. He said, if you look at proteins, and remember, this is a pre-DNA time. DNA is not discovered till 53. He makes a comment to the medical students that are there that proteins look like they have an electronic structure. They almost look like semiconductors. Now realize, at this time, quantum mechanics is in it. It's still not even known as the way everything operates. It starts in about 1890 to 1905 until Einstein comes in with Planck and all them. It's still being developed. In fact, quantum electrodynamics and quantum chromodynamics doesn't get its Nobel Prize till the 1960s. That's with Feynman and Schwinger. So we are right in the middle of this. And this doctor who wins a Nobel Prize for vitamin C said, I think we're filled with a bunch of semiconductors because of the atomic structure of proteins. So Becker hears this, and literally in 25 years, he definitively proves that Albert St. Georgi's hunch was correct. Now, the crazy part of this, from those 25 years, what happens in the United States? We move away from an industrial revolution, and we enter the information age. The information age where it's based on semiconduction, but semiconduction of silicon, not carbon. And this is where you have technology companies begin to explode. The Manhattan Project is the single thing that drove most of the big tech innovation. Most people don't know this. I know Europeans don't know American history well, but Americans don't even know it well. Why? Because as I told you before, the industrial military complex has tried to hide a lot of this from Americans, so they don't understand how these things link. Mm-hmm. So back in 1942, when FDR, oh, it's not 42, this happened in 39, Albert Einstein writes a letter to FDR that he thinks the Nazis are going to create an atomic bomb, and he knows a lot of the players that are involved. The number one guy that's running the nuclear program in Germany is Werner Heisenberg, who came up with the uncertainty principle. And this letter really alarms FDR. FDR then puts people together. At that time, there was only one intelligence agency in the United States. That was the FBI, that was formed in 1908. Ironically, because of some of the malarkey that went on with the royal family, J.P. Morgan, and in finances. So the guy that's leading that charge is a guy named J. Edgar Hoover, you may have heard of. And there's another guy named Wild Bill Donovan, and one of his proteges named Kennan. From 1939 to 1942, the FBI and this OSS, which is the precursor for the CIA, these guys are fighting about intelligence, about what's really going on in Germany. A civil engineer who went to West Point, who is really good. He knows a lot about science, a lot about engineering, and a lot about the military. So he has a very unique viewpoint. He's very different than the generals that you've heard of in World War II for the Americans, like Eisenhower, MacArthur, and Patton. His name is Leslie Groves. He gets tapped by FDR to run the Manhattan Project because he has an ability to do all these things. He has a skill set that's appropriate for, a huge industrial project. The first thing that Leslie Groves does, ironically, given what we've already said in the podcast, he goes and meets with Henry Ford and Rockefeller. And why does he do that? He knows that both of these men are in big industrial applications, and he wants to know about their process, about how you built cars and how you retooled from Standard Oil to create big pharma. So he gets a variety of different ideas from them, but the number one idea that he gets is that he's told by both men, and neither men knew what each other had told Groves, that the most important thing is that you need to silo people in what they're good at doing, and then you need to stay proximal to that so that you can link them all together. It's good for productivity and also limits the effect of sabotage. And of course, Groves, realizing that he's creating the biggest industrial project up to humanity at this time, this occurs. So one of the guys that's in FDR's cabinet, who becomes much famous later on in U.S. history, is named Allen Dulles. In fact, if you ever flown to Washington, D.C., Dulles Airport is named.
Dulles Airport, yeah.
Dulles is in charge of an operation that Wild Bill Donovan and Kennan come up with. It's called Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip goes to Europe and poaches all the best scientists that are Jewish because the Nazis are coming to get them. And believe it or not, that's how we get almost all of the people that work on the bomb. I didn't say all, but 80%. And we get some kind of wild cards in there. In fact, one of the people that we get, a lot of people doesn't know, is Werner von Braun, who actually brings all the rocket technology from the Nazis to the United States. And that's actually the birth of NASA. So I always tell people, before you think Hitler's completely bad, realize that he gave us some pretty big ideas in the United States, but we stole them. And FDR basically put all these scientists together with Groves. Groves makes the bomb, and he does it from 1942 to 1945. What happens at the end of the war is not very well known in America, and it's certainly not well known in Europe. You guys were much more interested in the Marshall Plan and how we rebuilt Europe. But two seminal events happened that Groves is involved with. The first one You know about these meetings that we have, Churchill, Stalin, and FDR. Well, the second one is with Truman. The first one is at Yalta, and this is where FDR basically tells Stalin, for you defeating the Nazis in Germany, we will rebuild Russia. You gave 28 million people, and we're going to do this for you. That kind of infuriated General Groves. And Churchill wasn't very happy either, because you know Churchill's history. He didn't really like communists. But he also had dictates from the king at the time, which was King George. I believe King George V. And George wanted to make sure that they kept the power over the seas to reach the colonies. Churchill didn't have much to say at Yalta, but he was very concerned, and so was Groves. Groves then comes up with a plan to get a better vice presidential candidate than FDR had. Why? Because at the time, FDR's got polio. He's in his third term. We have a DNC conference coming up in Chicago in 44, and he hand selects Harry Truman to replace Henry Wallace, who was a 3-term vice president. Why does he do that? Groves' idea immediately is after the war. He wants to set up an industrial military complex that's within the United States military. His idea is to morph the office of OSS with Bill Donovan and Kennan into the Central Intelligence Agency. Okay, that's where the idea is born. But it's born in all the things that happened in the Manhattan Project and in 1944. Most people know their history of the war. The bombs are dropped in the summer of 45, but I told you, we started in December of 44. FDR dies, and General Groves' hunch is correct. In April, Truman comes in. At the DNC, he gets Jimmy Burns, who's a politician in the United States, to replace Harry Truman. I should say Henry Wallace with Harry Truman. And the reason they do that is they want to create a Manchurian candidate that will do what they want to do, specifically set up the industrial military complex. Now, remember, all the leaders of industry in the United States, the guys that I'm telling you, Rockefeller, Ford, bankers, everybody is behind Groves' plan. They think this is a good idea. Why? Because they see how successful they are in building the bomb very quickly. The bomb at this time isn't even tested. It's tested. The final test is at Trinity in the desert in July of 1945. But when everybody from industry and everybody in the military sees it, they're stunned. They are truly stunned because nobody believed that they actually could do it that fast. And everybody in history is told about Harry Truman's thing on his desk that says the buck stops here. Do you know who put that on his desk?
No, who?
General Groves. And General Groves is the one that decided to drop the bomb. And this is what creates the big rift. The reason why the industrial military complex is no longer inside the government, it actually is forced outside. Why? The generals that were in Europe at the time, Eisenhower, Patton, MacArthur, they are absolutely furious what's going on back home. They feel like General Groves is a guy that is a babysitter of all these scientists. They have no earthly idea kind of what Groves is doing, but they look at it as their soldiers. They're taking care of people dying on the front. And Groves is getting all this applaud from back home, and they don't think he really did too much. So it turns out it's Eisenhower that eventually speeds this whole process up, because he basically convinces Truman that Groves needs to go. And Groves has no place in the military in a post-war world. Now, just think about this. This is a guy that creates the atomic age, and you have people in the military trying to force him out. So it's a power struggle. So who wins? It turns out Eisenhower does win. But on the way out the door, General Groves, in the National Security Act, it's an executive order in the United States. Literally, it's a paragraph that's this big. He turns the office of the OSS into the CIA. And that's how it begins. Then it gets crazier. Groves leaves the military. He goes in private life. And Eisenhower this whole time thinks he wins. If any of you don't know American history, who's the president after Truman? It's Eisenhower for 8 years throughout the whole 50s. So Eisenhower thinks he's won. And what Groves does on the outside of the government he has liaisons between all the people in the CIA. Then he gets two companies. One is called Remington Rand, who is the number one producer of guns for the U.S. military during World War II. Then he merges with another company called Burroughs, which is a simple machine company that makes, calculators, sewing machines, things like that. Nobody can figure out what he's doing. Remember what General Groves does. He's a corps of engineers, engineer general. He basically takes these two companies and creates the first computer company in the United States. It's called Sperry. And what does Sperry do? General Groves realizes from 1947 to when Eisenhower comes in that there's not going to be a lot of kinetic wars left. This is going to be wars about information. And how did he come to this realization? Believe it or not, some of the people that he put in place in the CIA, like Wild Bill Donovan and Kennan, had an opportunity when Alan Turing was still alive to go visit MI6 and when they were working on the Enigma code. The royal family never let, and Churchill never let, the Americans see what they were really doing, but it was very clear to the American military that information technology and cryptography was a really big deal, okay? And this is something America did not have at all at the time. So Groves gets this idea, creates this outside the government, okay? And what happens next? The 1950s in the United States was probably the golden age under Eisenhower. That's when everything was spectacular. But the industrial military complex grows from a small little seed and becomes a monster. At the end of Eisenhower's reign, this is now 1960, General Groves has military contractors everywhere. This is where Halliburton, this is where the oil people are involved. This is where all big tech, the seeds of big tech in the United States are built outside the military with links to the CIA and FBI. And shockingly, Eisenhower realizes in his last year that he has been played big time by General Groves. General Groves leaves what he built in 1961. But on the way out the door, Eisenhower gives this famous speech called his farewell speech. And in that speech, he makes the comment to the American public that you need to be very careful with the industrial military complex. And how crazy is this story when you realize that in 1958, everything that General Groves built on the outside, Eisenhower says, I got to have this on the inside. And what does he do? That's where DARPA is created. And DARPA is created at the end of Eisenhower's reign. And many of the pieces that General Groves built is actually then reabsorbed. Like the organizational structure is then reabsorbed back into the government. And again, you'll see there's 120 silos in DARPA. And believe it or not, DARPA didn't start out with the D in front of it. It was ARPA first. And for those of you who are following this story, you may remember the first big thing that General Groves and the industrial military complex built is ARPANET, which is the forerunner of the internet. This is where it starts. And what it was is designed to link academics all over the world. Remember the story I told you about Operation Paperclip? Now you're seeing the digital format of this story. The digital format of Operation Paperclip is General Groves is getting all the scientists everywhere in the world to communicate. That idea was born in the Manhattan Project. Now it's been modernized. In other words, it's evolved. So that's how it comes to power. And at the end of 1960, all the people that were germane in forming it, specifically the productionists, the industrialists like Ford, the Rockefellers, they sit at a position that's right next to the industrial military complex. And for you to understand why this complex has a huge play in centralized medicine, in healthcare and longevity, this power seat that they built basically becomes the strongest part of the U.S. military. And it actually begins to make most of the big decisions that occur down the road. And one of the things that happens through the 60s and into the 70s and the 80s in the United States is they get the idea that the government needs to control healthcare. And this is where you get HMOs. This is where you get DRGs, you get ICD-9 codes. What is the design for this? Is to subtract time from doctors so that they can focus on algorithms. What also is going on in DARPA at this time, they are creating algorithms that they eventually in 1994 and 95 give to Sergey Brin and Larry Page. And remember I told you, everything is preconditioned.
Yeah.
But the problem is if you don't understand the history, you don't understand how the system was built, you don't understand where the preconditioning comes from. And this preconditioning really started actually in World War I with the family fight, which was the royal family that went to the world stage. And it turns out the royal family lost more at that time than anybody else, even though we're on the winning side. And then what happens? The United States cedes control and then basically installs terms that almost guarantee a second world war with the Treaty of Versailles. And when you begin to understand how this whole thing unfolds, you begin to realize the same problems that you see in COVID are tied to the construction of this system. We've kept scientists siloed. We make sure that nobody talks to each other. We make sure
and
that
medicine.
Right, everywhere. And when doctors are going through, they're taught enough, but they don't question the system. And what is evidence-based systems now in centralized medicine? It's all algorithmic medicine, meaning it's recipes. So when you come in to the ED and you have supraventricular tachycardia, we have something called the BLS or ACLS algorithm that all doctors are supposed to go through. And it's reiterated through your training. No doctor thinks anymore. They just look at an algorithm. You're treated the same way in surgery. You're treating the same way with hypothyroidism. It's everywhere in the system. In other words, this idea of using algorithms is actually like a software program. And when you begin to understand that this happened from the merger of Burroughs and Remington Rand, and Sperry comes up, what does Sperry eventually become? It actually becomes Unisys. Unisys is one of the biggest industrial military contractors you can imagine. That happens in 1986. What does Unisys physically do? They work with Harvard University and Stanford University to come up with ICD-9 and DRG codes. And these things are the pillar of what has ruined American medicine. But it's ruined American medicine, but it's good for the industrial military complex because remember what General Groves' goal was: total control and domination of the system. Because remember, he's a process engineer, and he fundamentally had the belief that you have to get rid of this individuality in people so that you can get a common task done.
Standardize it basically to get the data to train the algorithms.
And that's what centralization is all about. Well, when you come back to the story that we started the podcast with Jack at the foot of Michelangelo's statue, nature, which uses light, water, and magnetism, is completely decentralized. In other words, there's no single controller. Nothing is siloed in nature. There's a light and a dark cycle. There's melanin and water. There's so many coupled cycles, it's not even funny. And they all have to work in unison in order for us to become who we're going to become. What really happened at the foot of that statue is because I happen to know the history of centralization in industrial America and information technology America. You now are seeing evolution 3.0, where you're going from the industrial revolution to artificial intelligence. And I can tell you, artificial intelligence is absolutely the single worst thing that could happen to humanity. Why? Because anything where it's used to centralize the process further, meaning your sovereignty for choosing, your sovereignty for freedom and liberty gets subtracted out. Why? Because there's a controller that controls the whole process. And the saddest part of this is that the population of the world needs to realize that artificial intelligence, when you actually sit down with these people, because the number one place it's being used in medicine right now is in longevity. So it's a really bad idea, and they're trying to put it everywhere. You need to realize that artificial intelligence has no target at all. If you sit down and ask them, In decentralized medicine, what's the target? That one's simple. It's our children. Our children are aliens. They're an alien between mom and dad. They have pieces and parts for each one. They're not the same as each one. They're different. And they actually operate on the same software program, light, water, and magnetism, that everybody else operates on. And when you begin to see that, and then you see from 1960s to now, it doesn't matter what country you're in, people are doing much, much worse. Why? Because many of the things that have come out of DARPA and the industrial military complex is actually really not good for health. Why? Because they destroy the key tenets, which is light, water, and magnetism. Like the number one for your audience who's probably not realizing, the screen technology that we all use. Screen technology creates blue light. Blue light destroys the signaling, the optical signaling in the leptin melanocortin pathway. But what else does it do? It dehydrates your mitochondria. So when you begin to realize that you don't create as much water as you get older, and this can happen now when you're 20, 30 years old, you begin to understand why kids are getting sick. You know, as teenagers, this is why suicide levels are up. It's also why kids are getting, neurodegeneration at ages that you can't fathom. But you haven't put two and two together. And I try to explain to people the simple ideas, because explaining the physics to them kind of makes their head explode. But I tell people, think about a baby that comes out of its mother's vagina. It's a ball of fat. It's a nervous system that's not fully developed, but the child is 80% water. Then correlate that with your grandmother or grandfather. They're 80 years old, 90 years old. They're only 50 to 55% water. All of a sudden you start to go, so aging and longevity has to have something big to do with water. And the other thing you'll find out is when you go down this path long enough, you'll find out that the older you get, the harder it is to make vitamin D. So what does that tell you? It tells you as you age, you need more sun, not less. That's exactly the opposite of what you're told in centralized medicine. And when you start stringing these things together, you start going, we're not told any of this in centralized paradigms and frameworks. In fact, almost everything you're told in centralized medicine, everything you're told in longevity is exactly the opposite of what decentralized medicine tells you. And the only way that you can understand my paradigm is to take a walk through history to understand how the paradigm was changed, through the industrial military complex, through the corporations in America, through the executive and legislative branches, because guess what? Everything America did in post-war America was then globalized everywhere in the world. Everybody has this belief that America is somehow better and smarter than everybody because we won 2 world wars and we bailed most of your asses out, in those wars. I think the one country that would argue with that pretty loudly is Russia, and I think they're right about that. Turns out Russia has done more work on decentralized medicine than the United States has done in the last 100 years. And how did I learn a lot of this when I went through this epiphany in 2005 to 2007? I spent almost $100,000 translating Russian articles on biophysics into English, because at that time there was no books on quantum biology. Now, people listening to this podcast, you won't have to spend that kind of money. But in the beginning, I had to do that. And that's where I found out that all living cells make extreme low frequency UV light through something called biophotons. And when I started to see all these little pieces, and these were not opinions, these were not conspiracy theories, then I started to think about some of the big ideas. I said, why is it that America has Google, Intel, and Microsoft and all these cell carriers, but Russia doesn't have any of it, and Russia has had all the information like we have? And remember, Russia built a bomb right after we built our bomb. It turns out Russia had the same information later than General Groves did, but they went a different path with it. And that's the reason why to this very day, their non-native EMF regulations are radically different than those in the United States. And for those of you who think Russia's a really bad player, when Stalin was still alive, he sent some of his scientists to Los Alamos in the Sandia nuclear labs to tell them that there was huge problems in biology if you use non-native EMF to build out tech weapons. It turns out all General Groves' friends in the military complex convinced Eisenhower at that time that this was, propaganda of the KGB. And it turned out that was the wrong decision. Why? Because the generals in the United States that were linked, this is a pre-DARPA world, they were still PTSD from World War II. They thought, Russia wasn't our friend. Who was the number one person that drove that ideology is actually General Groves. Why? Because the second meeting that I told you about, I glanced over it. After FDR dies, we have a meeting at Potsdam. Potsdam now is between Truman, Churchill, and Stalin. You know what General Groves told Truman at that meeting? Everything that FDR promised Russia, tell them, kiss our ass. It's going to be the reverse. You are now going to be our enemy in post-World War II. And that's actually how the Cold War started. It began at Potsdam.
Wow.
And this explains to you now why Russian science is very different than where we are. But you know where we are right now in the world. Don't you find it a little bit amazing that the one place Russia and the United States get along really well is in space? Didn't you see that we just brought an American astronaut home on the Soyuz rocket? So remember what I told you. Light, water, and magnetism is big in space medicine. And it turns out this is where our two governments actually seem to work well together, because each government has a big time respect for the science that underpins life and biology. The problem is it's not allowed to be brought to the American public as it is in Russia, because it would, how shall you say, unravel many of the things that underpin DARPA, which is the industrial military complex and big tech. If people really knew how dangerous big tech was with chronic abuse, you'd find out that all the things Bobby Kennedy and Nicole Shanahan are talking about in the United States, the chronic disease epidemics, were actually brought to the world because of what General Groves started in 1942.
Fascinating to hear the history. Thank you so much for sharing that. I hadn't heard that part of it. I'm familiar with what Bobby Kennedy's talking about, and Casey and Callie Means, who I know as well. And I think there is momentum in Washington to shed light on what is really going on. And hopefully there will be a paradigm shift again by raising awareness.
Hey, welcome, you epic being. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you, and if you've made it to now, I thank you for your courage and dedication to pursuing the truth and acquiring more data to expand who you are to be an ally to us all, right? So, Jack Cruz, right? Really interesting. If it's the first time you've come across him, it's might be fascinating, right? So, isn't it interesting? He talks about that variable of society, and it hasn't been shared before. And I'm just offering it because it's him as a teacher. I haven't really discerned it too much. But we all know some of the stuff he's talked about. And it gets into a health sort of stuff as well, right? But I'm just focusing on the internet apparatus, the multidimensional internet apparatus. And if we go back to the start with Eleanor, she talks about the smart cities and stuff. He talks about a bit like how Google was formed, and DARPA and the ARPANET and all those sort of things. And it overlaps with the Anthony Sutton, the post, the World Wars and history leading up to World War One and stuff like that. And then World War Two, and then post World War Two, and Eisenhower and what he said of beware the military industrial complex and stuff. And this was the guy from Jack's perspective that was behind all that, right? And then how that contributed to the medical sort of stuff. And Dr. Jack talks about the centralized and decentralized medicine, and he was very much in it and stuff. And this was only like a 30-minute sort of clip of human stuff. And he's been offering a lot of interviews out there, and I've gone through others. I'm not going to drop them now. if you want to go research him and pull on that thread and see where it takes you, it might be really interesting, right? So I'm just planting that seed. It's like you've got to be your own pattern recognition, you know, and be hungry for the truth and invest in all that sort of stuff, right? So yeah, all these three components together, I hope it's probably going to be a big release again, right? But I hope it's, again, this is offering data. It's just, I'm offering you the big data variables to add to that pattern recognition sort of stuff that I said at the start, right? So if you've made it to now, just measure yourself before you started this to you now with all that data, right? And what context did you have at the start to having now? And discern all this, right? For me, I just like to offer a platform of these people and a perspective so you can go into researching more and putting a pattern together of your own pattern, you know, filling in more dots and stuff like that, and adding to the overall data acquisition that we all need to sort of have a foundation to launch our perceptions from and stuff, right? So again, like this series where I'm at now, like I want to get into more of the advanced stuff of what's going on now, my history of the internet and in the IT space and stuff. I've talked about a lot of other areas, but if you don't know, I was an IT engineer and I basically self-taught, but that spawned out of my DJing of the employing passion to go find records, and like the DJ hierarchy in my city and all the record stores, they would only share the records to the elite DJs, so I went around it and used the internet and forged that way to overcoming the limits of my city and stuff. And that passion of employing passion to seek, it wasn't like the limits, as I said, it's like I have sort of an aim and I know the stuff's out there, I'm going to use my talents to sort of develop and all that. And that's where I got into this vein, which I talked about, which I have a relationship to the GPS sort of stuff that David Adair was talking about. And that lecture was really cool. Hey, talking about like the SDI, how it translated back to the internet and the World Wide Web and the origins of all that sort of stuff. And he was talking about the GPS at a very early era, like in that mid to late 90s, it was very, very far ahead. But now we're living in the era decades after and stuff. And Eleanor Freeland, she's obviously she cares a lot about people, and a bit like me, the leadership and the vulnerability and all that sort of stuff. And to me, I've always said leadership is stepping into the void, you know, the gap in society that you see, and then ideally I'm helping arm you up of, yes, all this stuff is massive and all that sort of stuff, but I'm also trying to inspire you of like, you imagine how vast we are if all this stuff is needed just to limit us to this, and be around people that are very indifferent to this and they're just going about their lives and trying to eke out an existence and wanting to, say, have children and create an environment for them to spawn, and which is what most of us all want, right? I think like to be here, you care a lot about our fellow man and what is going on and just the level of injustice that's not comprehended and what to do about it, right? And to me, that's where it comes back to our intuitive potential. Like Jack is really cool, and I really appreciate him, and he's working hard like in the trenches of the beyond the narrative at the different levels, and it's not about him in essence and stuff like that, but if we go back to the movie Limitless, right, and we've all loved that movie, right? It's about taking a pill to make our cogs work faster, and that's like lateral intelligence. It's like, it's not the vertical, the multi-D, right? And I might just show the awareness journey and all those sort of things, right, quick. So this is a spiritual no man's land image that I've used many times. I've got the whole our intuitive potential part 3 and 4 and stuff about the journey and all that. But the internet apparatus is to lock us down into that, right? And what I'm offering is about the movie Limitless. It's about like processing a faster lateral level, but the spiritual no man's land, this is the quagmire that most are in. But ideally I'm helping people get beyond that to our superiority to be the actual solution to all this, right? I'm just going to show the other image related to the awareness journey, right? And this is what it is like, right? Most people, if they accommodate this level of information, they'll never get out of that quagmire, right? And to me, what I've offered about the multidimensional potential, and that's why I'm calling it the Multidimensional Internet Apparatus. I offered part 14 of my multidimensional method to the 3D Madness series a few months after I offered the first multidimensional internet apparatus in July, right? You know, I dropped that multidimensional method to 3D Madness part 14 because there was a really potent clip that I offered in there about Bruce Cathy talking about how he was offered a recruitment into the black projects because he worked out the maths relative to the dimensional stuff back in 1968, right? And when he did that video in 2007, he said it was like 35 years earlier. So it was the late 60s, early 70s, which is a lot about the military-industrial complex and the origins of the internet sort of stuff that was going on, right? And the medicine and all that sort of stuff, right? And the reductionism, and he gets into the Rockefeller sort of stuff, which I've got all in my sovereignty declaration and all that, right? If you guys have gone through it, you know I'm offering a lot of data to sort of complement all those variables of stuff, right? Particularly relative to the medical system, which is where Jack's strength is, because he was in the trenches with it. But what I will just offer is, I'm solution orientated coming from my IT engineer background, right? And the solution is we have to have the courage to engage our multidimensional aspects to get to the superior state beyond all this, right? And I won't get into too much of that. That goes beyond what this theme in this release today is, but I hope this is an incentive for you to have the courage to burst through that ceiling of limit of your potential, of what you're willing to accept just because society is how it is, right? I hope like this multi-dimensional internet apparatus is an invitation for you to see the construct of society in a different level, and all these components that I've offered today add more depth to that, right? And potentially there is a lot more, okay? So I'm just going to move on. So this is going to be a big release in time and context and data points and stuff. But I also, while it is long and stuff like that, I always aim to make these releases a really rich investment to you. Measure where you were before to now watching all this, and ideally it just, you know, a lot of people into spirituality, they're not into the technology sort of stuff, but again, that's a limit, right? You have to be willing to acquire all the data, and you know, a lot of people, they're afraid of technology and stuff, and they're intimidated by it and stuff. And the way I embrace things, like when I really got going in IT, is like, okay, there's a lot of other people that are doing this, why can't I do it? If you can drive a car, you know, you've worked out how to be able to do that, or ride a bike, or many other things, right? So where does the limit that you can't do it comes from, right? And just one thing I aim to do is inspire you to evolve to become a better version of yourself every single day, right? So I really hope this is a very potent release for you. It's a really, I feel, I was deciding whether to break it up and offer the parts to get in different releases and stuff, and this is more a big download of data of some really amazing people that maybe you've never come across before, but it's helped inspire you to appreciate how rich our world is and how many other amazing people there must be out there and stuff like that. So I hope this empowers you. I hope it adds a lot of foundation to the context of the technology skeleton of the structures of society, because the internet, I feel, is that. And we'll look to expand upon this with a lot of the stuff that's gone on. And if you've got into Sabrina Wallace and all that sort of stuff, then it adds, you've already done some of your homework, and like Eleanor gets into the smart cities and what's going on now. So ideally, like, I've just helped you appreciate the bigger scales of the chipping away of what's going on in the world to where we're at now. So ideally, engage what I say is our superiority, the intuitive sort of aspects that, to me, is the solution to this, to being superior to it, to be beyond what's going on, right? Because I feel that's what it's about, especially the EMF stuff that Eleanor and Jack get into and stuff. That really goes at the highly aware, right? And the what's in the non-visible spectrum with the entities and all that sort of stuff, right? So, but I'm just going to round this out and thank you for being here. And I'll look to add more to this in the future. I hope it's been a very potent release. It's really awesome, as always, to be with you. And if you want to take yourself to the next level, seek healing, all right? Clear out all the gunk to maybe get to that level, what is blocking you and your potential, but also get that real inspiration to put it all together and all your aha moments, and clear out all the gunk that's in the way, and really engage in your sovereignty, guys. It's so important with all this stuff. And if you want to, again, take this to the next level, go through my sovereignty declaration. It's a tool that's there that I've invested a lot in to be an investment to our potential as a species, because it's going to take a lot of things like that for us to overcome what's going on, right? Everything is up for grabs. So thank you for your courage to even contemplate this stuff, and let's see where we go, guys, all right? Thanks as always. Thank you for all you're doing that no one knows about, and all the battles you've had to endure. And I've had the privilege of interacting with a lot that are like champions of existence just to be here, right? But let's make it worth it. Let's take it to a whole new level, and let's see where you and I and us all can go if we have the courage to go beyond anything that's ever been defined before, right? Let's own this shit, right? Take care. See you next time. And Andre the Brat from Down Under out, all right? Take care. Lots of love. Until next time. Bye for now.
In December, heading for the city lights, 975. We sharing each other, nearer than farther. Scent of lemon drips from your eyes. We are the people that rule the world. Rejoicing in the world, take me now. We can
John Lilly once put it this way: there are no limits at all to the human mind whatsoever, except those we impose on ourselves because of our beliefs. And those limits are also beliefs to be transcended. And that's a view that suggests that the possibilities of human transformation are virtually infinite. And we have no way of knowing the outer horizon of what it means to be human.
And really, to understand all this, everything, you have to go very, very deep into a study of history, consciousness, neurophysiology, everything. You have to be the supreme eclectic type of leaning, and you really have to be wanting to know who you are and what everything's about.
And the thing that you'll find when you go to sacred sites, if you're very humble about it, is that you are on a personal journey, and the sacred site will respond to you in a way that is appropriate only to you. The information is always what you are searching for. And it's the intent you give that energy that defines whether it is used for right action or not. And it is inside these sacred spaces that you will be reminded that you are a god, that you are a bright star.
So what you're trying to do is move through the course without ricocheting off walls or creating karma. You're trying to slide through things smoothly. How do you do that? It's called flowing. There's a technique that you can do that will allow you to touch some part of your inner being that has more knowledge than your conscious state does.